Hey, how's it going guys? Kaptain Kuba here and welcome to another God of War video. As I'm sure you guys know, it has been almost 4 months since God of War Ragnarok was released. And naturally, this is the time when we start hearing more about small details regarding the game's development. Details that, let's be honest, only hardcore fans of the series care about. Sure, we learned a lot about the development of this game through the behind the scenes series, but the details discussed there are not what lore enthusiasts like me drool over. That's why I was beyond excited when I learned that Matt Sophos and Richard Gobert, the two lead writers from Santa Monica Studios, did an interview in which they discussed the development of God of War Ragnarok's story. It's a really great interview that sadly I will not be able to cover fully in this video. So for those of you interested in learning about Matt and Richard's creative process, I've left a link in the description below. Today, however, I wanted to focus on what I thought was the most interesting topic they discussed in the interview: the original story draft for God of War Ragnarok. As you guys know, game development is not a one-shot process. Usually developers have to go through different iterations of certain mechanics and features before they feel good enough to be shipped. And the same rule applies to the game's story. But just because this process is normal, it doesn't mean that we, the hardcore fans of the series, aren't going to discuss what these alternate God of War games would have looked like. You've all heard of David Jaffe's original story for the ending of the main trilogy. But wait until you hear about what God of War Ragnarok's story was going to be about.
There was the earliest draft of an outline that we had come up with that we took to Eric. We had Kratos. This is deep inside stuff, but Ben, we have a relationship now after many years.
That's right.
But Kratos died in the Thor fight at the very beginning of the game.
Oh wow!
And so he was going to die, and then it wasn't a permanent death. What was going to happen, and I don't care. We can tell this because it doesn't happen anymore. So this is all fan fiction at this point now. He would get pulled out of hell essentially by Atreus, but it's now been like 20 years have passed.
Oh my God!
It's going to be a big time jump type thing. So
yes, the original story for God of War Ragnarok sounds like it was going to have a much darker tone. As you guys heard from Matt, the game would start with Thor showing up at Kratos and Atreus' house, just like it was teased back in God of War 2018. Naturally, both Kratos and Thor would fight, and this would result in Kratos' death. This would have been the death prophesied in the Jotunheim mural. Following that, Atreus would go on an adventure to rescue his father from the underworld, but due to time dilation between the realms, Kratos would experience time very differently than Atreus. For Atreus, the journey to rescue his father would only feel like a couple of days or maybe weeks. But to Kratos, the time that it would take Atreus to save him, it would feel like 20 years. Or maybe it was the other way around. From this interview alone, it's hard to tell because I'm not entirely sure if Matt Sophos is talking about Kratos going to Helheim or Valhalla. Because if Kratos died in battle against Thor, he wouldn't go to hell like Matt said in the interview. Instead, he would find himself in Valhalla, the mythological place where the souls of worthy warriors would go to spend the afterlife. So maybe instead of Kratos being in prison for 20 years, Atreus would be the one to experience 20 years as he traveled the realms to save his father. It's hard for me to choose between these two options because I'm not sure which character would be the protagonist in this story. If they would have put us in the shoes of Atreus, I'm sure the game would have ended with the plot twist that Kratos had been in prison for 20 years. But if he played as Kratos, I'm sure the game would have ended with Kratos exiting the underworld and seeing an older Atreus. Or maybe it wasn't an either-or scenario. Much like the structure of God of War Ragnarok's final story, in this first draft we might have played as both Kratos and Atreus. During the sections with Atreus, we would have the goal to rescue Kratos, while during the sections with Kratos, we would have the goal to escape the underworld, resulting in both Kratos and Atreus meeting 20 years later. But look, the specifics of how this time skip would have worked aren't important. What's important is that time dilation was originally going to play a much bigger role in the story, something that both Cory Barlog and God of War 2018 seem to have hinted at.
Time doesn't move the same between all realms, especially where the spirit world is concerned.
Like the light of Alfheim.
The opposite, in fact. The Lake of Souls feels faster than Alfheim time, but Hell is much slower than Midgard.
Mimir has a line about Helheim moving slower than Midgard, and it's just all these elements of time moves differently in places. I want to dive deep into that, but I don't know if that's setting up things to come or...
Yes, it is.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
Now believe it or not, time dilation did make it into God of War Ragnarok. When Atreus travels to Ironwood, to him it feels like only a couple of hours have passed. But when he returns to Midgard, Kratos reveals that from his perspective, Atreus had been gone for 2 entire days.
What were you thinking?
I wanted to visit Fenrir.
For 2 days.
Time dilation in God of War Ragnarok was used to further expand the theme of trust in the story. While in the original story draft, time dilation seems like it was going to have a much bigger impact on the Norse world. Because Kratos being in prison for a very long time has Odin written all over it, and I believe I can prove it. In God of War 2018, you can find a scroll written by the Raven Keeper that makes a reference to Thor's part in the All-Father's plan. However, in God of War Ragnarok, we never see Thor's part of the plan. Thor simply shows up, gets his blood payment, and disappears for most of the game. Thor helping Atreus find the missing part of the mask could be considered part of the All-Father's plan, but surely I'm not the only one who thought Thor's part of the plan would be a lot bigger, more important to Odin if you will. But can we reconstruct this original plan? Probably not, but I can give you my most educated guess. I think Thor's original part of the plan was to kill Kratos. This would have the effect of sending Kratos to the underworld, just like Matt Sofo said in the interview. Odin needed Thor to do this because Odin feared that Kratos would be the one to bring Ragnarok itself. This would have been an understandable fear since Kratos already brought a Ragnarok type event to the Greek realm. If Thor was successful, Kratos would have been sent to Valhalla, where Odin would be able to imprison him. Now, by this point in his life, Kratos already endured a similar fate at the hands of the Furies. But unlike the Hecatonkri's prison, escape from Valhalla would have been more difficult to achieve, maybe even impossible. Within Valhalla itself, there would be thousands of Einherjar soldiers ready to serve the Old Father if Kratos attempted to escape. But if Kratos somehow managed to escape Valhalla, he would still have to deal with the entire Norse pantheon. And even if he managed to kill all of them, he would still be stuck in Asgard due to what Odin did to Tyr's temple. It's almost like Odin planned all of these conditions in preparation for Kratos' arrival to Asgard. Which wouldn't be too hard to believe, because according to lore and legends, 170 years before the events of God of War 2018, Odin learned that the infamous ghost of Sparta would be somehow involved in the events of Ragnarok.
Odin effortlessly set the details of the tapestries and triptychs to memory. The final triptych was the most remarkable, as he had not yet heard this tale foretold. He glimpsed the visage of an untamed warrior, accompanied by his son, traveling towards a mountaintop.
I don't know about you, but when I think of Odin, these are the types of schemes I imagine him doing. In God of War Ragnarok, we see Odin using his powers to help the Einherjar soldiers remember who they were during their mortal life. And like Mimir says,
I think letting them remember themselves was another small way of cheating death any way he could. So I wouldn't be surprised if with that small gift of autonomy, he also embeds an undying personal loyalty to himself.
So Kratos being imprisoned in Valhalla could have the purpose of stopping Ragnarok, but Odin would also get a chance to experiment with one of the most dangerous beings in the universe. Can you imagine what Odin would be able to achieve with Kratos on his side? Alright, I know a story like this would have never happened. Kratos going rogue in the sequel is not something any one of us would have liked. It just wouldn't have felt right as a continuation of Kratos and Atreus' arc. But if you find yourself liking the idea of Odin wiping away Kratos' memories or imprisoning him in Valhalla to prevent his death in Ragnarok, then that tells me you were hoping for a more traditional God of War villain, someone whose motivations are more cut and dry. And for a time, this was going to be Santa Monica's take on Odin.
What was Odin like in that version?
I think he was more of a
Okay.
overtly, you know?
Right, a little more classic villain type of thing.
Odin's remaining eye twitched. He felt the ripples of Groa's prophecy come crashing across the realms. Ragnarok, Odin whispered to himself with a tremble, and then, lifting himself from his throne, the All-Father hissed, Groa.
Look, I honestly don't know how to feel about these changes. Like Matt and Richard said in the interview, this original story of Kratos dying at the beginning just wouldn't have felt right. For one thing, it would have been too similar to other moments in the series. And I also think the reveal of the man in the mural would have been really anticlimactic if it was done this way, as opposed to what we saw in the final game, which none of us saw coming. But I also think that giving Atreus the goal to rescue Kratos at the beginning of the game would have given the story a sense of urgency or threat, something that in my opinion just wasn't present in the final game. In regards to Odin, I'm also somewhat conflicted. Not as much though, because the Odin we saw in God of War Ragnarok truly is a very well written villain. At one point, he even convinced me that he wasn't such a bad guy, which is exactly what he wanted Atreus to believe, making his schemes and manipulation of events more subtle, more personal. But I would be lying to you if I didn't say that I also wanted to see him do some crazy schemes with magic. There was a little bit of this with Freya's curse, but I just wish there was more. I think this is why some fans have said the final fight with him felt underwhelming. It's not that the boss fight is bad, mechanically speaking is one of the best in the series. The issue is that prior to this fight, Odin was never portrayed as a powerful magic wielder who always had a backup plan. So when you saw him do all of this cool wizard stuff, it just felt out of place. But if the game would have shown Odin taking advantage of time dilation or magically imprisoning Kratos in order to prevent his death in Ragnarok, then I guarantee you that this final physical showdown with him would have felt much more earned. So like everything in life, the decision Santa Monica took regarding the game's story has its pros and cons. With the final game, we got a heartfelt story between a father and son learning to let go, while the original plot sounds like it was gonna put a lot more focus on the Norse world and the consequences of interfering with time. So let me know if you're fully satisfied with the story God of War Ragnarok tells, or if you would have liked it more if things like time dilation played a bigger role in the story. Now, I will ask you to keep this discussion in the comments section of this video. Don't go over to Twitter and start harassing Santa Monica developers for the decision they took regarding the story. Because if you do, Ceci's gonna come and teach you a lesson, and trust me, you really don't want that. But with that said, I want to give a big thanks to all of my members for supporting the channel monthly. As you guys know, this video had to be delayed an entire week because I've been dealing with an ear infection that spread all the way to my throat, which explains why I haven't been able to record for an entire week. So I really appreciate all of these fans that go the extra mile to make sure the channel stays afloat. I really couldn't do this without your support. So from the bottom of my heart guys, thank you. I would also like to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching, and remember, go forth, in the name of All Father Kratos.